She thought I'd never find out. A hidden life insurance policy, secretly increased over the years, and a beneficiary line that didn't include me or our daughter. That's how it all began. Quietly, legally, and behind my back. It started with something as mundane as a broken fridge. Ours had begun making a strange humming noise. Nothing alarming, but enough to bother me during my morning coffee. I figured I'd dig out the warranty paperwork before calling a repairman. We kept all those documents in the bottom drawer of the study desk, tucked behind old receipts and manuals. As I was digging through the usual mess of paper, dishwasher instructions, car maintenance schedules, an expired coupon booklet, I found a manila envelope with my name on it. No stamp, no label, just my name written in Joan's tidy, looping script. I figured it was some sentimental thing. Joan was the nostalgic type. She'd sometimes leave me little envelopes with anniversary cards or old photos from our trips. I smiled a little as I opened it, expecting to find something from years ago. Maybe a note, maybe nothing. What I found, instead, made me sit down on the carpet. Inside was a life insurance policy, a big one, and it was for me. That caught me off guard, sure, but not as much as the next detail. The beneficiary wasn't Joan. It wasn't our daughter Mia either. The name listed was someone I'd never heard of in my life, Brent Nolan. I just sat there for a few minutes, trying to figure out what the hell I was looking at. The document wasn't new. It had been printed a few years ago, but it had updated notations, handwritten changes, new signatures. I scanned for dates. The most recent revision was only about 18 months ago. My first thought wasn't anger. It was confusion. Who was Brent Nolan, and why was he listed to receive $500,000 if I dropped dead? I didn't confront Joan right away. That's not how I handle things. I come from the kind of family where people take a deep breath, gather facts, and speak only when they're sure. So I made photocopies of the policy and returned everything to its exact place. I told Joan the fridge just needed to defrost, and we'd keep an eye on it. She didn't seem suspicious. She smiled and went about her day. That night, I sat out on the porch for longer than usual, watching the sun go down over the neighbors' oak trees, thinking about our life. 31 years of marriage. One daughter. A modest house we paid off together. A quiet retirement. What the hell was going on? Over the next week, I paid closer attention. Joan's routines hadn't changed, but now I was watching them differently. She took her afternoon walks like always, spent evenings watching those courtroom dramas she liked, and chatted with her sister on the phone. But now, those chats happened more quietly, and she started taking the calls out on the back deck, where I couldn't hear her voice. When I asked her about money, small talk, nothing accusatory, she brushed it off like always, telling me she had it under control. "Don't worry so much," she said, like she always did. I decided to look into the insurance company listed on the form. It wasn't the company we used for our house or auto policies. It was a separate firm entirely, one I didn't even recognize. I called them pretending to be her assistant. I figured if I sounded old enough and harmless enough, I might get someone to talk. To my surprise, they confirmed the policy existed and was active, but wouldn't tell me anything more. Privacy laws. Only the policyholder could access beneficiary information. I already knew the answer, though. I just wanted to hear it from someone else. The name Brent Nolan rattled around in my brain like a stone in a tin can. I asked myself again and again if I'd ever heard it. It took me 2 days to remember. Joan had worked briefly for a property management firm 10 years ago. She hated the job, complained constantly about her manager, called him cocky, slick. But once, just once, she described him as charming in a snake oil kind of way. I hadn't thought much of it back then. I was working full-time, traveling for work. She quit after less than a year. His name was Brent Nolan. Now the pieces started connecting in my mind, slowly and uncomfortably. I wasn't ready to make accusations. Not yet. But I wasn't going to wait around either. I needed real advice, not guesses. I reached out to David Parker, an old friend from our church. He was the attorney who helped us draw up our wills years ago. He still had the file. I showed him what I'd found, the copied policy, the dates, the beneficiary name. David's face didn't change much, but he leaned forward, hands folded tight. "This isn't a mistake," he said plainly. "This is deliberate." I asked him what kind of person would do this. "People who are planning something," he said. "Not necessarily anything criminal. But if she's changing beneficiaries, hiding policies, and keeping you in the dark, she's laying the groundwork for something you won't like." David recommended we begin by revoking any powers of attorney she held, financial and medical. Quietly, just a safeguard. He also suggested we update my own will immediately and create a paper trail showing that I was aware and taking action. That night, Joan and I ate dinner together like always. She laughed at a show she liked, poured us each a glass of wine, and said nothing was bothering her. I looked across the table at a woman I'd lived with for over 3 decades and realized something that shook me more than the policy itself. I didn't know who I was living with anymore. I wasn't sleeping much after that. Not because I was afraid, though maybe I should have been, but because my mind wouldn't stop circling around the same quiet questions. Who was she planning this with? How long had it been going on? Was there something deeper, darker behind the document I'd found? Joan didn't act any different. That's what made it worse. She wasn't nervous, wasn't sweet-talking, wasn't avoiding me. She behaved like the same wife who made French toast on Sundays and folded laundry while humming old country songs. But now, every normal moment felt suspicious. Every smile a mask. David had put a hold on all the legal power she had over my affairs, carefully, so she wouldn't be notified just yet. We'd updated my will, rerouted my accounts, and opened a safety deposit box for key documents. It felt surreal, taking these steps against someone I still ate dinner with. But I kept reminding myself, she had taken steps first. I decided it was time to learn more about Brent Nolan. A name was no longer enough. If he was somehow involved, if this wasn't just an outdated document or an innocent oversight, I needed to know what kind of man had his name on my death benefits. I started with online searches. Brent Nolan wasn't a common name, but there were still more than a few results. I narrowed it down to the real estate company she used to work for. Sure enough, he was still there, promoted twice since Joan had left. Vice President of Sales. His picture was right there on the website. Silver hair, deep tan, that kind of forced smile people wear in promotional photos. I'd never met him in person, but something about the look in his eyes made me uneasy. Too confident. Too polished. I dug a little more. LinkedIn, old articles, employee reviews. Nothing illegal, but plenty of stories about how he charmed his way into deals. A few offhand mentions in real estate forums about under-the-table negotiations. Again, nothing solid. But the kind of man Joan once called charismatic in a snake oil kind of way hadn't changed. I thought about confronting her more than once. I imagined sitting her down, laying out the papers, and watching her reaction. But every time I got close, I stopped myself. I wasn't ready. I needed more. Evidence. Timing. Leverage. Then, something happened that changed everything. One Thursday afternoon, Joan said she was meeting a friend from her old yoga group for lunch. I nodded. No questions. But something in her voice, a little too cheerful, too rehearsed, made me pause. After she left, I waited a while, then drove over to the cafe she mentioned. Not to follow her. Not exactly. Just to see. She wasn't there. I waited 20 minutes. Ordered coffee. Scanned the small dining room 3 times. Nothing. I checked the parking lot. Her car was gone. I drove slowly back home, parked a block away, and walked up the street. I wasn't sure what I was doing. This wasn't like me. But something had shifted, and I needed to know how deep the deception went. Her car was back in the driveway. I waited a while, standing across the street like some lost neighbor on a stroll. Then I saw it, through the living room window, half-drawn curtain. Joan, standing, laughing, handing a glass of wine to someone just out of view. I moved slightly to the right, just enough to catch the corner of the sofa. There he was, Brent Nolan. A little older than his website photo, but unmistakable. I didn't move, didn't blink, just watched as he leaned back like he belonged there, like he'd been there before. Joan laughed again, touched his knee as she sat. I turned and walked away. Not because I was angry, though I was, but because now I knew. This wasn't just about a policy. It wasn't just paperwork or paranoia. They were together, in our house, and they had plans. Back home, I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the study with the lights off, thinking about 31 years of marriage, about our daughter, about everything we built, and how quietly it had all been traded away while I made coffee, fixed the fence, paid the bills. The next morning, I called David. I told him everything I saw, and that I was ready to move forward. We began documenting things, quietly, methodically. He advised me to install a legal surveillance system in the home office, which I did the same day. We secured access to our shared bank records and downloaded every statement from the last 2 years. I found 2 transfers to a Nolan Real Estate Consulting LLC. Not huge amounts, but not small either. David recommended we notify Mia, our daughter, gently and carefully. Not about everything. Not yet. Just that we were adjusting some estate plans and there might be changes. I agreed. She was grown now, with her own family, but she'd always believed we were the example of a strong marriage. I hated the thought of ruining that for her. But I hated more the idea that Joan might drag her into the mess when things blew open. That weekend, Joan acted like nothing was wrong. She suggested we visit the farmer's market, maybe drive up to the lake next weekend. She was affectionate, smiling, engaged. She had no idea I'd seen them together. No clue I'd opened accounts in my name only. That I had consulted 2 more attorneys and secured full ownership of the house based on legal documents she signed years ago without reading closely. She had planned something. But she underestimated me, and I wasn't finished yet. I always believed that silence was a strength. You learn more by listening than speaking, and people reveal the most when they think no one is watching. Joan thought I was just aging into forgetfulness. She smiled when I asked her to repeat things. She patted my hand when I hesitated before answering. She thought I was growing slow, but I was simply becoming quiet and precise. After catching her with Brent in our living room, I didn't bring it up. I didn't slam a door or demand explanations. I went on with our routine, only slightly adjusted. She cooked, I cleaned. She watered the plants, I mowed the lawn. But every word, every action, every unexplained errand she made now had context. I was seeing the whole picture, not just pieces. And I was documenting everything. I set up a hidden audio recorder in the study, the same place I'd found the insurance policy. It was legal in our state, especially in our own home, and David confirmed it. I placed a spare phone with a call recording app under the couch, where Joan often sat to take her private calls. I kept a journal, recording every visit Brent made while I was at the hardware store or meeting my cousin Ed, who, for the record, passed away in 2017. Each entry, each date, each phone log gave me leverage. And leverage is power when the time comes to act. One afternoon, while Joan was out shopping, I opened her laptop. She didn't password protect it, probably because she never believed I'd check. I went straight to her email. She wasn't sloppy, but she wasn't paranoid either. Most messages were clean. But then I checked the drafts folder. There were 3 unsent emails to Brent. One was recent. It read, "I've started preparing the paperwork. David's still clueless. If we keep calm a few more months, we can have it all in place. The house, the policy, everything. I'll handle Mia when the time comes." My name wasn't David, of course, but it was obviously me. I sat back in the chair. My heart didn't race. I didn't break anything. I just felt cold, focused. This wasn't about an affair anymore. This was calculated, premeditated. She was playing the long game and planning to clean me out. I took screenshots, backed up her drive to a flash, closed everything. Then I went to the garage and spent the afternoon quietly fixing the drawer on her gardening bench, like nothing happened. That night, over dinner, Joan said Mia had invited us to a barbecue the next weekend. She smiled and asked if I wanted to go. I said, "Sure, that sounds nice." She kissed my cheek and cleared the plates. I watched her move around the kitchen with ease. The same woman who once cried at my father's funeral, who held my hand through surgeries, who danced with me in our first apartment. Now preparing to replace me like an old chair she'd grown tired of. I thought of Mia a lot in those days. How would she react when the truth came out? Would she believe me? Or would Joan twist the story, cry, play the victim? I couldn't risk it. So, I made sure Mia got a copy of the audio. David sent it to her, not me, in case questions came later. And just in case Joan tried to turn her against me. 2 days later, Mia called. She didn't say much, only asked, "Are you okay?" I told her, "I will be." And she said, "I believe you, Dad." That was all I needed. I kept going. David and I drafted an emergency estate transfer, which would reassign my ownership of assets if anything unexpected were to happen to me. We moved joint accounts into trust-protected vehicles under my name only. Joan still had access, but only to limited funds, the kind that wouldn't trigger suspicion. The final piece was the insurance company. I contacted them again, this time with David on the line. We submitted formal documents contesting the legitimacy of the beneficiary change and opened an investigation. It wouldn't cancel the policy, but it would flag it, freeze it if anything suspicious happened. If Joan thought she could cash out without consequences, she'd be in for a rude awakening. A week later, Joan got a phone call that shook her. I was making tea in the kitchen when I saw her through the window, sitting on the back deck, pacing, phone to her ear. Her body stiffened. She said, "I don't know what you're talking about," and then, "No, I didn't authorize that." She ended the call quickly, came inside like nothing happened. I asked if everything was all right. "Wrong number," she said. "Some confusion with an old insurance thing." I nodded and stirred honey into my tea. She knew something had shifted. She just didn't know how deep. That night, she didn't sleep well. I heard her getting up, walking the hallway, checking locks, whispering on her phone. I stayed in bed, calm, focused, waiting. The game had started to turn. By mid-month, the tension in the house was like a pot on low boil, not whistling, not bubbling over, but always simmering. Joan's behavior had changed. Her routines became looser. She paced more, spoke in half sentences, spent more time in the guest room, where she suddenly claimed the lighting was better for reading. I didn't press. I let her move through her unraveling web of lies, while I kept notes, quietly, diligently. Every morning, I made coffee and sat on the back porch, same as always. I trimmed the hedges, took out the trash, smiled when she asked about dinner plans. Meanwhile, David and I were finalizing every detail: trust transitions, property filings, healthcare directives, even the post office notification to redirect sensitive mail. I wasn't just preparing for the storm. I was making sure I'd be standing when it passed. The insurance company's fraud investigation moved faster than expected. I got a call from a senior claims investigator named Loretta. She confirmed there were irregularities in the change of beneficiary documents, specifically that Joan had signed on my behalf using a signature that looked like mine, but wasn't. They would be escalating the matter internally, possibly to their legal department. She thanked me for my transparency. Joan had forged my signature, and now it was on record. That was the moment I stopped thinking in terms of escape and started thinking in terms of resolution. I wasn't going to just protect myself. I was going to make sure she couldn't do this to anyone else. Not to Mia. Not to Brent. Not to the next man who thought she smiled because she cared. A few days later, I made what would be my final play. I invited Joan to dinner. Nothing fancy, just pork chops, roasted potatoes, and her favorite glass of red. I wore the flannel shirt she once said made me look rugged in a retiree sort of way. I lit a candle, played soft music on the old stereo. She looked surprised when she came down from her room, dressed in house clothes and wearing that carefully neutral smile. "Everything all right?" she asked. "Just felt like a warm meal," I said. "And we don't talk much anymore." She sat. We ate in mostly silence. I talked about the garden. She asked about Mia. But beneath the table, her foot bounced, and her eyes kept shifting, not to me, but to the office door across the hall. She knew something was off, but she didn't know what. After dessert, I stood and walked into the study. "I want to show you something," I said. She hesitated, then followed. On the desk, I had laid out 3 items: the forged insurance document, a printed copy of her draft email to Brent, and a USB stick labeled recordings. She looked at them, then at me. "What is this?" she asked. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I simply said, "This is everything. Everything I know. Everything I've documented. And everything my lawyer now has, in duplicate." Her lips parted slightly, then shut, then opened again. "You went through my private things?" I gave a slow nod. "Yes. After I found out you changed my beneficiary to your old coworker. And after I saw you two in our living room." Her face changed. Not panic, not denial, but something worse: calculation. Like she was mentally reworking her plan on the spot. "You misunderstood. Brent was." "Don't," I interrupted. "We're past pretending. The insurance company knows. Mia knows. And the lawyers, well, they've known for weeks." She sat slowly in the chair beside the desk. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up the policy. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she said. "But it did." We sat in silence for a full minute. Then she asked, "So what now? You want a divorce?" "No, not yet." Her eyebrows lifted. "I want you to move out. I've already arranged temporary housing for you. Nothing fancy, but comfortable. You'll have access to a small account, enough to cover basic living expenses for the next 6 months." Her mouth dropped open. "You're paying me to leave?" "I'm giving you an option. You take the quiet exit, or we go public. Court filings. Fraud charges. Witness statements. Mia on the stand. She stared at me like she didn't recognize who I was. Maybe she didn't. Maybe the version of me she thought she could outmaneuver never really existed. Maybe he was just the polite, agreeable husband she sculpted in her head, the one who smiled while she sharpened the knives. She stood, nodded once, and left the room. She moved out the next day. I didn't celebrate. There was no victory dance, no smug satisfaction. Just quiet. Real quiet. And for the first time in months, it didn't feel threatening. The following week, I had lunch with Mia and her husband. We didn't talk about the mess in detail. But when she hugged me before leaving, she said, "I'm proud of how you handled it, Dad. You didn't just protect yourself. You stayed true." That meant more than any courtroom win ever could. The house felt different after she left. Not just because of the absence of her voice, or the click of her heels down the hallway, or the faint lavender perfume that lingered in the master bedroom, though all of that was gone. No, what struck me was the absence of second-guessing. The quiet was no longer suspicious. It was just quiet. I could read the newspaper without wondering what she was really doing upstairs. I could sip my coffee without scanning her phone on the table. But peace didn't mean it was over. I still had to dismantle the mess she'd tried to build. David filed the last of the civil protection paperwork within the week. The insurance company sent a formal letter confirming that the policy was under review for possible criminal misrepresentation and that I had been re-established as the sole beneficiary. I didn't want the money. That wasn't the point. The point was that she'd tried to erase me, on paper and in spirit, and now the paper had spoken back. A part of me kept expecting Brent to come knocking, angry, dramatic, making some kind of plea or threat. But he didn't. Whether Joan had warned him or he simply saw the writing on the wall, I'll never know. His name quietly vanished from the firm's partner page 2 weeks after Joan moved out. Pursuing new opportunities, the blurb read. I couldn't help but smirk. I hadn't told many people what happened. A few close friends knew pieces. Mia, of course. David. My cousin Claire, who was sharper than most gave her credit for. But I didn't go around broadcasting it. Not out of shame, but because I didn't want this chapter to define me. I'd spent 31 years building a life, and Joan had tried to rewrite it in the final act. But she didn't get the pen. One afternoon, about a month later, I got a letter in the mail with no return address. Inside was a folded piece of plain white paper. It simply read, I thought I was protecting myself. I didn't expect it to go this way. Tell Mia I'm sorry. There was no name, no signature, but the handwriting was hers. I held it for a long while before setting it down. I didn't feel pity. I didn't feel angry. I felt tired. Tired of carrying the emotional weight of someone else's betrayal. Tired of wondering why love, when twisted by fear and greed, becomes so unfamiliar. I didn't tell Mia about the letter. Maybe someday I would, but not now. She was doing better, visiting more often, sending pictures of the grandkids, even dropping off pie on Sundays. She never mentioned Joan, and I never brought her up. We had moved into a space of cautious healing, and I didn't want to disturb it. Still, not everything was back to normal. I found myself reviewing my will, double-checking bank accounts, scrutinizing bills I used to glance at casually. Trust, once cracked, doesn't heal quickly, but at least now I controlled the damage. Joan, for her part, didn't contest anything. She accepted the housing offer, took the settlement we'd arranged, and vanished from my daily life. No lawsuits, no demands, just silence. I think she knew she had played her last card and lost. David called one morning to let me know that the fraud review had officially closed. No charges would be filed, not because they weren't justified, but because the insurer considered the matter resolved by internal policy correction and beneficiary restitution. I thanked him. He offered lunch. I declined politely. I just wanted to go sit in my garden. That's how I spent most of my days in the months after, pulling weeds, planting tomatoes, talking to neighbors about soil types and irrigation. I rebuilt my little routines. I didn't need a grand revenge or dramatic conclusion. I just needed clarity. And that's what I'd won. One evening, as the sun was setting over the back fence, Mia stopped by with her youngest, Lily. We sat on the porch and ate vanilla ice cream out of paper bowls. Lily asked why Grandma hadn't visited lately. Mia froze, spoon halfway to her mouth. I answered first. Sometimes, people need time to figure themselves out, I said. And sometimes, they figure out the wrong things. Lily nodded like that made perfect sense and went back to her ice cream. Mia gave me a quiet glance, not sorrowful, not grateful, just knowing. We didn't say more. We didn't need to. Fall came early that year. The maple in the front yard turned a brilliant orange before September even ended. I'd always loved this season. The cool mornings, the quiet streets, the sense that the world was gently winding down without asking permission. There was something honest in it. Something clean. I found myself raking the leaves more slowly than I needed to, just to stay outside longer. Joan hadn't contacted me since the letter. No calls, no emails, no surprise visits. I didn't expect her to. She'd lost the game she thought she could control. Whatever she did next, it would be on someone else's turf. I learned later, through an old mutual friend, that she'd moved to a smaller city up north, rented a modest place, started doing volunteer work, probably to rebuild her image more than her conscience. Brent, the beneficiary, had completely disappeared. Mia told me once that his name came up in a fraud case involving misused corporate funds. I didn't dig further. I wasn't interested in what happened to him. He was never the real architect. I was more focused on what I could control, my peace. My life didn't return to what it was before Joan's betrayal. It evolved into something better, simpler. I reclaimed my routines and made new ones. I took an evening class on woodworking. I cooked more, even tried baking. My sourdough was terrible, but the process calmed me. I learned how to sit in silence without suspicion, to walk into a quiet room and feel peace instead of anxiety. That took longer than I expected. One of the most unexpected gifts in all of it was how much closer I became with Mia. Our conversations deepened. She stopped seeing me as just dad and started asking me real questions about marriage, about choices, about regret. I never badmouthed her mother. I didn't need to. Mia saw enough. But I told her the truth when she asked, in careful pieces that left space for her to draw her own conclusions. One night, we were sitting on my back porch, she with a glass of wine, me with tea, and she said, "I used to think you were just passive, like you let things happen to you." I waited. But now I realize, you let people think that. You saw more than you let on. You always did. I smiled. Sometimes you win by not reacting right away. Silence isn't weakness. It's just waiting with intent. She nodded and clinked her glass to my cup. Weeks passed, then months. The trees went bare. Snow came and left. And then spring returned, with green shoots and soft wind. Life, for all its losses, has a way of pushing forward. Then one morning in late April, I received another letter, this time with a return address. It was from Joan's attorney. She was requesting a formal meeting to discuss unresolved emotional matters. Not legal, emotional. She wanted to talk. I sat with that letter for a full week before deciding. We met in a small, neutral office near the courthouse. No lawyers, just a facilitator. She looked older, thinner. The confidence that once strutted beside her was gone. She wore a pale blue coat and carried herself like someone unsure of what they deserved. She didn't apologize in grand speeches. She didn't cry. She simply said, "I didn't think you'd ever notice. And when you did, I thought you'd fall apart." I almost did, I admitted. "But you didn't." "No." She asked if I hated her. "No," I said after a pause. "I don't hate you. I just don't trust you. And trust is all we ever really had." We sat quietly for a few minutes. Then she reached into her purse and slid over a small envelope. "I had this written months ago, in case I never saw you again." Inside was a short note. Not legal, not binding. In her handwriting, acknowledging everything. Her affair, the forged document, the lies. It was like a confession, not to exonerate her, but to confirm I wasn't crazy. I folded it and slid it back across the table. "I already know the truth," I said. "But thank you for writing it down." We didn't hug. We didn't shake hands. She left first. That was the last time I saw her. The truth is, I didn't need justice in the way people think of it. No courtroom showdown, no dramatic confrontation. I needed dignity. I needed to look in the mirror and know that I hadn't become her just to fight her. And I hadn't. I held the line. Mia still visits every Sunday. We cook together now. She's even learning to use my old woodworking tools. Said she wants to make a bench for her garden. I tell her it'll take time, and she says, "That's the point." And sometimes, on quiet evenings, I sit on that porch with my tea, watching the shadows move across the yard. Not waiting for the past to knock again, but simply enjoying that it's over. Because in the end, I wasn't erased. I was restored.